Okay, this lesson is about St. Paul's letter to the Romans. It's about the whole of the letter, because we will be reading from it for the next couple of weeks. Of all of St. Paul's letters, those to the Christians of Rome have long held the pride of place. It is the longest and most systematic of letters, unfolding of the apostles' thought, expounding the gospel of God's righteousness that saves all who believe. It reflects a universal outlook with special implications for Israel's relations to the church. Yet, like all Paul's letters, Romans 2 arose out of a specific situation or event. For this one, when the apostle wrote from Greece, likely Corinth, between AD 56 and 58, St. Paul was about to leave for Jerusalem with a collection of funds for the impoverished Christian Jewish believers there, taken up from his predominantly Gentile congregations. St. Paul then planned to travel onward from Rome to enlist the support of the Roman congregations for a mission to Spain. With so much missionary preaching successfully accomplished in the East, St. Paul sought new opportunities in the West in order to complete the divine plan of evangelization of the full Roman world. Yet, St. Paul recognized that the stop in Jerusalem would be hazardous, and we know that Paul was arrested there and came to Rome in chains as a prisoner of Caesar. The existence of a Christian community in Rome antedates Paul's letters. When it arose, likely within the sizable Jewish population at Rome, and how it rose, and by whom, which of the apostles or by which faith leader they started it, we do not know. The Roman historian Suetonius mentions an edict of the Emperor Claudius from about AD 49, ordering the expulsion of Jews from Rome in connection with a certain Christos, probably involving a dispute in the Jewish community over Jesus as the Messiah, also spelled Christus. According to Acts 18:2, the saints Aquila and Priscilla were among those driven out from then. In Corinth, St. Paul may have learned about the conditions in the church at Rome. Opinions vary as to whether Jewish or Gentile Christians predominated in the house churches in the capital city of the empire at the time St. Paul wrote. Perhaps already by then, Gentile Christians were in the majority. St. Paul speaks in the letters of Romans of both Jews and Gentiles. The letter also refers to those weak in faith and those who are strong. This terminology may reflect not so much differences between believers of Jewish and Gentile backgrounds, respectively, as an ascetic tendency in some converts, combined with Jewish laws about clean and unclean foods. In other words, kosher laws. The issues were similar to problems that St. Paul had faced in Corinth, vis-a-vis the status of male gentilia of the Gentile converts. To circumcise or not, that was a frequent question. St. Paul writes to introduce himself and his message to the Christians in Rome, seeking to enlist their support for the proposed mission to Spain. He therefore employs formulations likely familiar to the Christians in Rome. The gospel St. Paul represents is meant to be a familiar one to those in Rome, even though they heard it first from other preachers. Others have viewed the discussions in Romans more in the light of St. Paul's earlier, quite polemical letter to the Galatians, and therefore see the theme as the relationship between Judaism and Christianity, a topic judged to be much in the minds of the Roman Christians. Each of these religious faiths, Judaism and Christianity, claimed to be the way of salvation, based upon a covenant between God and the people chosen, and that people was then made the beneficiary of divine gifts. But Christianity regarded itself as the prophetic development and fulfillment of the faith of the Old Testament, declaring that the preparatory Mosaic covenant must now give way to the new and more perfect covenant, that which could only be found and revealed through Jesus Christ. St. Paul himself had been the implacable advocate of the freedom of the Gentiles from the laws of the Mosaic covenant, and, especially in Galatia, had refused to allow attempts to impose them on the Gentile converts to the gospel. Examples of this would be circumcision and the task of keeping kosher, which were the items most discussed. Jesus and St. Peter noting how only 25 to 32% of all Jewish homes truly kept strict kosher, and 15% of those only did it on the High Holies, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Pesach, otherwise known as Passover. St. Paul had witnessed the personal hostilities that developed between the adherents of the two faiths, and had written his strongly worded letter to the Galatians against those who were Jewish first, but only slightly Christian. These Judaizers, as they were called, sought to persuade the converted Gentile Christians to adopt the religious practices of Judaism, for the Judaizers were truly Jewish and were only paying lip service to Christianity. In other words, they didn't really believe in Christ as the Son of God. They didn't believe in the resurrection or the forgiveness of sins. For St. Paul, the purity of the religious understanding of Jesus as the source of salvation would be seriously impaired if Gentile Christians were obligated to amalgamate the two religious faiths. In other words, if they were required to do all of the same washing rituals, become circumcised, keep kosher, do all of the same prayers associated with meals as the Jewish did. St. Paul's letter to the Romans is a powerful exposition of the doctrine of the supremacy of Christ and of faith in Christ as the source of salvation. It is an implicit plea to the Christians in Rome and to all Christians, including us, to hold fast to their Christian faith. They are to resist any pressure put on them to accept a doctrine of salvation through works of the law, which is what the Judaizers want. At the same time, they are not to exaggerate Christian freedom as an abdication of responsibility for others, or as a repudiation of God's law and His will. As you listen or read St. Paul's letter to the Romans, you will hear his very different tone. For instance, when you hear Corinthians, you can hear his love of Corinth. You can hear his friendliness of the Corinthians. It is in 1 Corinthians where he writes, if I speak of love, but if I speak of languages of all the peoples and have not love, I am a clanging cymbal or a clinging gong. And he goes on to say, love lasts forever. And he is speaking of love to the people whom he loves. He would never write that to the Romans, because those people were arguing with him every other day. But he loved them by the end of the letter to Romans. Watch, listen, pray upon this, and then think as you're listening. What are the subtexts of this letter? What else might St. Paul be thinking about? What is he conveying on top? But what is the message down here? Because he always has a subtext in his messages. Okay? I love Romans. I don't quote it often because most of his quotes are going to be about 2 pages long. But occasionally there are some beautiful ones in there that just pierce the heart. I will see you tomorrow. Peace to all. Bye for now.